Hi guys! So as I'm sure you're all aware, the weather has started to cool off somewhat. September is well underway and that means that autumn is either here or fast approaching depending on your definition of the seasons. I have no opinion. But it does mean that I'm going to also share with you my autumn TBR. So these are all the books I would like to get to in the autumnal months. You know the drill by now, so let's just jump straight in. The first one is one that I actually think I'll be reading in October because it has a spooky feel to it, and that is Raw Blood by Katrina Ward. This is one that I picked up on the recommendation of the Eves Alexander booktube channel, which I will link down below. She has fantastic recommendations, particularly for literary horror. At least that's something that I've gotten recommendations from her in the past and really enjoyed. It follows a family that live in an old crumbling mansion in Dartmoor where every member of this family has been cursed to die young, and we are following the latest generation, a young woman named Iris. And she has decided to ignore the curse, to go out into the world, fall in love, experience what the world has to offer. However, it leads her to discovering the dark truth behind this curse and what it truly means. And yeah, it sounds creepy and intriguing, and I'm here for all of that. We then have a retelling of Beauty and the Beast that I was recently sent by the publisher, and that is A Curse So Dark and Lonely by Bridget Kemmerer. So the sequel to this just came out and I also have that, so I'd like to get around to starting the series. But what I think is particularly unique about this Beauty and the Beast retelling, which is a YA novel, is that our protagonist and the Beauty character is a teenage girl with a cerebral palsy, and that's not something I see represented a lot in young adult literature, particularly fantasy, and I think it's a really great concept to kind of introduce more diverse representation into such a popular fairy tale that is Beauty and the Beast, and one that I really enjoy reading retellings of. Basically, Harper, the Beauty character, is pulled into a magical realm where she meets Prince Wren. She lives in the, ordinary contemporary world that we all live in most of the time, and she's kind of forced to take on this curse that the Prince Wren is under and save them both. So it sounds really excellent. I then have some non-fiction here on my pile, and the first one is Why Women Have Better Sex Under Socialism and Other Arguments for Economic Independence. I was sent this a little while ago by the publishers and thought it sounded fantastic, but a few people I trust have also read it recently, and that's got me all the more excited to pick it up. It is essays all about women's experience of different kind of political regimes in different countries, how they benefit from more socialist policies, how capitalism directly affects women, etc, etc. So I'm really intrigued by this. And then I also have one I have out of the library, so want to get to very soon, and that is Angela Y. Davis's Women, Race and Class. Angela Y. Davis is one of my favourite people, as well as non-fiction writers. This is one of her non-fiction titles, which I think the title of is pretty self-explanatory. This is an exploration of feminism, the class struggle, racism, and all of its intersections, and you just trust that I will get something fantastic whenever I read Angela Davis. So those are also on my TBR. I then have a sequel that honestly I can't really believe I've not got into yet, and that is Lair of Dreams by Libba Bray. This is book 2 in the Diviner series, book 4 of which in this series is coming out very shortly, so I thought I need to, get back on this train, get back on this series, read this one, presumably love it as I did book 1, and continue on to read books 3 and 4. This is a kind of paranormal YA fantasy historical series. It's set in 1920s New York. We follow a bunch of young people who actually have kind of supernatural powers. So our sort of initial main character, Evie, can feel and experience memories from objects belonging to people. But when she moves to New York, she finds she's not the only young person with a strange power, and there may be a reason or a destiny that entwines them all. The first one also had a bit of a murder mystery subplot, so I'll be intrigued to see how that carries on into this one, as well as the development of the relationships between all of the characters. It's multiple point of view, and there's a really awesome like diverse selection of characters to follow, so yeah, I'm looking forward to catching up with them. I then have a book I recently treated myself to and have been meaning to treat myself to for quite some time, so want to pick it up immediately, and that is The Lost Queen by Signe Pike. This is a historical fantasy novel set in 6th century AD Scotland, or what is now Scotland, the very north of the British Isles, shall we say. It's about a princess and her brother who are invested in the old druidic traditional folklore and religion of their people. However, she's been betrothed, presumably by an older male relative, I don't know if it's her father or uncle, you know, standard plotline, to a Christian prince, and that kind of threatens her way of life, and I don't really know how that will develop, whether she will have a positive or negative relationship with this Christian prince, but I do know that she is going to do what she can for her people amidst turmoil and threats to their way of life, and it sounds excellent. I've seen it compared to Juliet Marillier, so I'm so here for it. I then have a book that I was gifted by my friend Kathy, whose channel I will also link down below, and that is a adult contemporary romance, which is something I've been trying to dabble in recently, and that is Fix Her Up by Tessa Bailey. This is about a girl or a woman whose primary career is of performance clown, and because of that she is not particularly seen as a sexual being by those around her, and she wants to change their perception of her so that she is seen as some glamorous sexual woman, and so she fake dates this really handsome friend of her brother's. Like, it sounds very ridiculous and contrived, but I've heard amazing things about this from people I wholeheartedly trust. I think it's going to be like a good fun rom-com with like nice romance, probably some minor drama and a few giggles, so I'm here for that. Completely different to that is Slaughterhouse-Five by Kurt Vonnegut. I only read one Kurt Vonnegut book in my life and loved it. It was Galapagos. I just thought it was brilliant. It was a book my dad recommended to me, and he was also a big fan of Kurt Vonnegut, so I've meant to read more by this author for a while, and I was sent this really nice new edition of Slaughterhouse-Five by the publisher, so thought, why not go here next? I think this is one of his most famous novels. It's also, I believe, an anti-war novel, so it's based on Kurt Vonnegut's own experience of World War II. The author himself was actually a prisoner of war during the war, and this is kind of, I don't know if it's gonna, from my experience of his writing, he uses kind of satire, black humour, dark humour to explore quite serious topics, and I'm intrigued to see how he does that in this scenario, and I'm sure I will discover that this is a classic for a reason. We then have a book that I recently read, another book by this author, and that is Once Upon a River by Diane Centerfield. I loved the other book I read by this author, which was called The 13th Tale, and immediately had to read her latest work, which is Once Upon a River. This one is another kind of like literary mystery. That's what the 13th Tale was. The 13th Tale really wove kind of different layers of mystery together in such an expert way. It was so beautifully written, so intriguing. Oh, just wonderful literary craftsmanship is how I can describe it. And in this one, 3 girls have gone missing, however one has turned up dead. They have brought the body back to the village, and a few hours after they have discovered her body dead, she wakes back up. She is, you know, come back to life, as it were, and it's about the mystery surrounding this village, these missing girls. Is there an element of magic realism? Was she dead? What happened to her? And it just, I'm just certain I'm going to love it. I've heard great things, so I'm really excited. Another one that may be for October is Scratchman by Tom Baker. This is a Doctor Who novel, and I have been so in the mood for some Doctor Who recently. I'm like a Whovian. I've loved Doctor Who since I was a child, and I've always really enjoyed reading Doctor Who novels as well as watching the TV series, but this is Tom Baker, who you may know as the 4th Doctor's first, you know, foray into writing a Doctor Who novel, and it follows his Doctor, so this is not one that is set amidst the current like seasons. I do actually have a Juno Dawson book on my bookshelves at the moment, which is following the most recent incarnation of the Doctor. But this one takes us back in time to Tom Baker's Doctor, along with his companions such as Sarah Jane Smith, a classic, and it also sounds like it's going to be super dark and creepy. Look at the cover, like, dark and creepy. But essentially the Doctor and his companions end up in the creepiest of all places, which is of course rural Scotland. Such a trope in literature, isn't it? That rural Scotland is like so creepy, which I'm okay with. I mean, I've seen Wicker Man. It's creepy. And they end up in like rural Scotland where there are creepy scarecrows on the loose, which does actually resemble an actual episode of Doctor Who, but I'm sure this is going to be unique and a fun like time travel, space travel romp, which is exactly what I want. I then have another YA novel, this one being science fiction, and it is The Kingdom by Jess Rothenberg. This is set in a futuristic world in a theme park, a little bit like Disneyland, but where the princesses are actually like androids. So the princesses are androids developed specifically for the kingdom, and they have their own personalities, they have independent thought. And although it dabbles in that idea of like, are robots people if they start thinking, it's more about the way these androids are treated as women and an exploration of women's treatment in contemporary society, but through a science fiction setup. And basically one of our android princesses has been accused of murder, and it's all about, did she do it, did she not do it, who is setting her up if she didn't. Sounds really good. I then plan on reading my first ever Tamora Pierce book, which is Wild Magic, the first in a quartet or a trilogy. It's the first in a fantasy series regardless, and it follows a young woman who has an affinity with wildlife. She can talk to animals, so it's all about nature magic. And I don't really know that much more about it other than everybody loves Tamora Pierce, like everybody. If people like fantasy, then they seem to love Tamora Pierce, so I'm just ready to try my first book by her. Then a few books on my Kindle and on audiobook. On my Kindle, I'm currently reading Bride of the Sea by Emma Hamm, which is one of her Otherworld novels that retell traditional fairy tales, this one retelling The Little Mermaid. And I'm currently buddy reading it with Amanda over at The Naughty Librarian, another channel I will link down below, and I'm only a few chapters in at the moment. I think I'm like 8% of the way in. So we'll be continuing to read it throughout the month. So far so good. I really enjoy Emma Hamm's fairy tale retellings, and this one has been a little bit weird so far, but in a good way, so I'm intrigued to see where it goes. All of her fairy tale retellings are set in the same universe, but you can read them independently, and technically this one comes as book 3 in the series, and I've read books 1, 2, 4 and 5. Another book I'm currently reading, or in this case listening to, is the audiobook of Lowborn by Kerry Hudson. So I'm actually just past 50% of the way through this audiobook, so I've no doubt I'll finish it in the next few days. And it's basically Kerry Hudson's non-fiction memoir about growing up in an impoverished part of Aberdeen in Scotland, as well as in fact jumping around the country with her mum, temporarily being in foster care, and just what it is like to grow up in poverty in the United Kingdom. It's hard hitting, it's sad, but it's also such an important story. Kerry Hudson seems like such a phenomenal young woman. I would highly recommend this book. It is narrated by the author, and I just have found it so touching throughout so far, and can't wait to finish it. And then a book I haven't actually picked up yet, but will either pick up the audiobook or the physical copy, is Heir of Sevewanters, which is book 6 and the final book in the Sevewanters series by Juliet Marillier. My favourite fantasy series of all time. I love it so much. And I have a book up here which you might see called The Harp of Kings, and this is Juliet Marillier's most recent release. It's the start of a new series, and you can completely read it without having read any of her other books, but technically it's set in the same world as Sevewanters, so I would just like to have completed the Sevewanters series before I pick up this new book by her. Sevewanters are beautiful, majestic, slow-paced, romantic fantasy novels set in medieval Ireland, and I have raved about them about every second video on my channel since I started reading them, so I won't say much more than that, other than I would like to wrap up the series, although I'm kind of sad at the idea that I will be finished it. Thankfully, Juliet Marillier is still producing amazing literature, so I don't need to worry yet. And then lastly, one collection of poetry that I wanted to mention is A People's History of Chicago by Kevin Koval. This poetry collection is inspired by a non-fiction book by Howard Zinn about the history of America and the people who lived there. And this is looking at the people in the outskirts of Chicago, as in like the people that are pushed to the outskirts, or who are part of minority groups, who are not necessarily given the voice that they deserve as members of that country and that state and that city. So I have been really intrigued to read this since I first read about it, and hope I will really enjoy it. But those are my top priority books. No doubt things will change up slightly. I will end up borrowing or getting new books that I want to read. We will find out, won't we? But I would really like to prioritise these books in particular. Do let me know if you have read or are interested in reading any of them. Which ones do you think I would like the most? Which ones would you like to see reviews of the most? I would love to hear from you. But until next time, happy reading, and I'll see you all again soon. Bye guys!